Anti-racist is code for anti-white. Now, I'm just going to go and throw out right now that this is something that the ADL has recognized for ages, is a dog whistle. But let's go ahead and take a look at the article itself. And by article, I mean video, and by video, I mean paint in my rear. Ariel, please, tell us about how anti-racist is anti-white. We're all listening.
The trouble with saying it's okay to be white, of course, there's a article on this.
White nationalism or neo-Nazism isn't the same as saying it's okay to be white.
Everyone knows these days that it is.
Those beeps hurt my ears and my soul. Why?
Not enough to simply be not racist. You have to actively be anti-racist.
Yes, that is true. Here's the reason why. If you have a loud racist in the room, and then next to them you have somebody who is not actively countering that, who's just accepting that, and then you have a racial minority in the room who is disenfranchised here, by default, the racial minority, they're going to look at the racist and look at the person not speaking up about the racist, and they're going to immediately know this is not a place for me. If you are simply not racist, but you don't do or say anything about racist people around you, then the end result is you continue to disenfranchise racial minorities around you. That's not difficult to understand. It's just not. But, you know, this is another one of our how I left the left types. Let's go.
I didn't know what the that meant, so I had to look it up. Also, you might notice that there's no ads on this video because YouTube demonetized me yet again because they hate me.
Well, yeah, because you literally throw out rhetoric like this. Blows dick, I know.
So if you want to go and support me and see other content that has never been posted on this YouTube channel or anywhere else, go to my locals page, ariel.locals.com. Go check that out after you watch this video.
Or don't.
Let's get right into it. First two things that come up are anti-racism is a code word for anti-white. Second thing that comes up in a Google search is how to be anti-racist. You know what? We're gonna look at both of those because I have no clue what I'm doing with this video. But I do think it's interesting that already you can see the juxtaposition here of the two different sides of this argument. So this is the Smithsonian, by the way. So for those of you who don't know, it is a reliable source. I think it's a not-for-profit, government-owned series of museums and such across the country. They are the ones that wrote this article or posted this article. Being anti-racist. To create an equal society, we must commit to making unbiased choices and being anti-racist in all aspects of our lives. Okay, they still didn't say what it was, but let's see if they say here. Race does not biologically exist. So how can you be racist? Okay, I'm sure that.
What? Are you... Ariel, are you dumb? Wait. If somebody just points out that race doesn't biologically exist, and then you go, oh, then how can you be racist? Do you not realize that there are socially constructed things around our lives that dictate the way we interact with the world every day? Fictional characters are characters that we have the ability to hate and be anti that particular character. Hell, if I were to throw out a character's name and ask you what your opinion on them is, I would get a fuck ton of negative responses, I know. So we're just going to go ahead and say, for everybody who's watched Evangelion, let me go ahead and throw a character's name out for you. Shinji. And now we're going to get all of the flood of either Shinji apologists or people who have watched End of Evangelion and know that Shinji is essentially a rapist. And I am ready for that particular conversation to happen. But also, let me point out another socially constructed thing that dictates everything we do in our lives, Ariel. Okay? Here, let's talk about it. Money. How can you be a billionaire if money is socially constructed? Well, as it turns out, the value that money has is only there because we've agreed on it. If everybody in the United States were to agree at once that money had no value, money would have no value. We'd have a bunch of pieces of paper with no meaning to them because we all agreed that it no longer has a value for us. In fact, actually, the way that our currency is valued has changed over time. We used to have things like the gold standard, and that went away. Because it is a socially constructed thing with values based on our agreements on it. That's it. So when somebody says race is socially constructed and then you say, aha, then races can't exist, you look like a fucking idiot.
They're going to tell us. I'm sure they're going to tell us. Yet how we identify with race is so powerful, it influences our experiences, shapes our lives. In a society that privileges white people and whiteness, racist ideas are considered normal throughout media, culture, social systems, and institutions. Historically, racist views justified the unfair treatment of oppression of people of color. Yes, absolutely, in the past. I also looked this...
No, it still does that today. You don't have to be overtly not rapist. You don't have to be overtly racist like Merle from the first season of The Walking Dead to still be racist and for your ideas to still pervade society. Trust me, as somebody living in the American South, at least a good portion of the population down here, if you tell them that their daughter is going to come home with a black man tomorrow, there's at least going to be a hushed conversation in the kitchen beforehand. But no! Racist ideas and overtly, white representative ideas are not a problem anymore. That's all in the past!
Up on a number of different sites. Here is what I found. Being anti-racist is fighting against racism. Racism takes several forms of works, most often in tandem with at least one other form to reinforce racist ideas, behaviors, and policies. Types of racism are, we about to be educated. Okay, ready? Individual racism refers to the beliefs, attitudes, and actions of individuals that support or perpetuate racism. The U.S. cultural narrative about racism typically focuses on individual racism and fails to recognize systemic racism. Okay, so individual racism basically is like what most people think of when they hear the term racist.
Yeah, most people think of Merle from the first season of The Walking Dead. Yes. Most people think of the virulent white guy with the shotgun going, I don't want my daughter coming home with no black man. That is what most people think when they think racist. Yes. It is a very narrow definition of racism.
Like anyone can be racist. That's what most of us think, right? Interpersonal racism. Oh god, there's like 10 different types of racism. Maybe we can check all the boxes and be all the different types of racism.
That's not a good thing. That's not something to aspire to.
Interpersonal racism occurs between individuals. These are public expressions of racism, often involving slurs, biases, hateful words, or actions. Okay, I guess we could say that someone who is an individual racist might express themselves in a nasty way, and that's what interpersonal racism is. Interpersonal racism is kind of like a verb. Institutional racism. These are discriminatory treatments on
racism. It's what you do.
Fair policies or bias practices based on race that result in inequitable outcomes for whites over people of color, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so the first two types of racism can be attributed to a person of any race, but the third type of racism can only affect people of color, right? Like, am I understanding that right so far? Just to make sure I'm following along. Structural people
Hold on.
attributed
Let's make
to
sure.
a person's color, blah, 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 blah.
So, institutional racism occurs when in an organization, these are discriminatory treatments, unfair policies, or biased practices based on race that result in the inequitable outcomes for whites over people of color and extend considerably beyond prejudice. These institutional policies often never mention any racial group, but the intent is to create advantages. All right, so let me give you an example of institutional racism in United States politics, specifically having to do with Georgia. Let's talk about the exact match system for signatures for voting in the United States, okay? At least this is a thing that we've had in Georgia. The exact match system means that your signature must match exactly, I mean, it is what it says, between what you have on, say, your driver's license or identification and what you have on a piece of voting identification. Whenever you submit your vote, the signature you have on there has to be an exact match for the signature that you have on your main form of identification. Now, here's the problem with that and why it's a form of institutional racism. If you're a white person, the chances are your name is going to be something simple like Tom Jones or, Tim Bradley or something like that. But if you are ethnic in any way, shape, or form, the chances of you having a harder to spell name or a longer name in general or even a hyphenated name where things get really dicey is much higher. And when you have one of those kinds of names, disproportionately, you will fail the exact match system. Disproportionately compared to white people who generally have simpler names, your name, your signature is going to be filtered out, making it harder for you to vote. This creates an inequitable outcome for whites over people of color or people of various ethnicities. And it's not even seen as something that is prejudiced, because when I just say, hey, your signature should match exactly on your voter identification as it matches on your driver's license, that doesn't sound bad. That sounds reasonable, but then when you look at the end result of it, it disproportionately affects people of color. That is a form of institutional racism. But, you know, it's not like we had an argument for that, literally, right out of my home frickin' area of Georgia.
Okay, so the first two types of racism can be attributed to a person of any race, but the third type of racism can only affect people of color, right? Like,
that disproportionately affects people of color.
Am I understanding that right so far? Just to make sure I'm following along. Structural racism is the overarching system of racial bias across institutions in society. These systems give privileges to white people, resulting in disadvantages to people of color. Example, stereotypes of people as criminals in mainstream movies and media. Okay, so if people of color are being portrayed as bad guys in movies, and that's considered structural racism, does that mean it's structural homophobia when we see the constant, like, gay boy best friend in every movie? Like,
no. But what is structural homophobia is the prevalence of gay and trans people, or people that are meant to represent those groups, as villains. The disproportionate amount of time that they are represented as villains. It's having a negative stereotype associated with that person or that minority group. It's not just having a gay best friend and that usually being the role that gets typecast for that person. That is a problem, yes, but that is not the same thing. It's only when it is a negative person, when it is portrayed in a negative light. Think Resident Evil. Let's take the Resident Evil franchise for a second here. Now, in the Resident Evil franchise, there are, to this date, that I can think of, in one of my favorite franchises, no gay people, and there's only one person who could even be considered maybe trans-ish? Maybe. And that would be Alfred Ashford. And he's shown as a villain who is willing to genocide his workers, and the quote-quote transness of his character is linked entirely to mental illness, due to the trauma of losing his sister, and I don't want to spoil too much about Code Veronica, because it does have a very good story, but the point is, that is a very straight-coded franchise. Almost everybody in that franchise is either straight or white. There's one non-white person in there, and that was Sheva, and that was only because political backlash made her have to exist as a character. That is a type of this type of structural misrepresentation, where, you know, the majority of your good guys, proportionally speaking, end up being white, and when you've got a bad guy, they end up being some form of black. Or hell, let's take another one. Let's take one that is closer to the example that you gave, but is in a negative light. Who's the first person to die in a horror movie? This is a stereotype that pretty much everybody believes is a rule, and has been for a while. First person to die in a horror movie. Somebody's going to pop in the chat and say the black person. It's either going to be the black person or the people who are, or it's going to be the people who are having sex, which deals with the Puritan culture of when a lot of slasher fics came to be. Also, somebody just pointed out, what about Carlos, man? Carlos can't figure out his ethnicity or his accent. He goes from being maybe Latino to very, very white halfway through Resident Evil 3. Let's not.
Like, and he's super feminine and everything. All jokes aside, though, this has come from a government-funded website, and it's made its way into the educational system. It's getting a lot of praise and a lot of pushback.
Weren't there 10? I thought there were 10 in there.
Recently found an article written by a teacher who expressed the importance of critiquing the anti-racism ideology. He goes on to explain that while he originally supported Black Lives Matter, he's since become skeptical and no longer supports the movement. Anti-racism ideology is built on a specific premise. Racial disparities are the result of a white supremacist society. He goes on to write that his discomfort stemmed from observing the insidious authoritarian pressure in many education systems to make sure they are not deemed racist. In some of the workshops he's attended, the ideas ranged from creating more diversity committees to paying employees of color more money for the invisible work that they do. And by the way, I'm just quoting what he wrote. He goes on to state that the new trendy definition of racism, prejudice plus power, aggressively calls for revolutionary dismantling of institutional structures.
So can I point out that the prejudice plus power is a very academic version of racism, but it only deals with not a handful, but it only deals with certain types of racism. You can be racist against a white person, for instance. You can be racist against anyone. You don't merely have to be a minority for racism to be done against you. However, there are certain types of racism that it is less likely that you will experience if you are in a racial majority group. But I guess that's lost in the conversation.
What this new wave of anti-racism is teaching people is that if you're not actively fighting racism, you're condoning it. He makes it.
Well, yeah, that one I do agree with. If you see racism somewhere and you have the ability to do something about it and you choose not to, then you are part of the problem. You are the silent head nodding in agreement that what they're doing is okay. That doesn't mean that every single time everything racist happens in the entire world that you need to step up and take care of it immediately, because nobody's got the spoons for that. Nobody does. But if you have the opportunity and you have the wherewithal and you make the active choice not to, that is an issue.
It's a great point when he says that this is causing students to not speak out against ideas they disagree with in fear of being labeled a racist. The same goes for people who speak out against the new gender laws, like myself, being labeled transphobic, which is interesting to me because inflating labels for the sake of shutting down someone who disagrees with you is inevitably going to create more division and hate. Who wouldn't develop some type of—
Ah, yes! You are not tolerating my intolerance, therefore you are being hateful and intolerant. No, that's not how this works. Yes, there is an issue where if you overinflate something, people will stop taking it seriously. If I say that, what was it? I think it's in the Ship of Theseus video that that was done by Innuendo Studios, where a statement like, this person is a bigot, stems from 3 other statements, and it's an inflation of that. It does create sort of a person who cried wolf scenario. That can be an issue. But in many cases, if I see somebody who is putting out a gender law that says that a trans child is not allowed to participate in sports, I'm just going to call that what it is. That is transphobia. That is a form of transphobia. I don't see that as an issue, pointing out what it is on its own. Now, where we do run into the weeds, however, is sometimes people like me and people like those featured in the video might not agree on if something is in fact transphobic or is in fact racist or is in fact something. Like when I pointed out the laws that we had on exact matching signatures. When I see stuff like that, it might not be that me and, say, Ryan Kemp agree that the end result of that is a racist outcome, despite ontology being on one of our sides.
Of resentment towards another human being after being accused of something so insidious.
Okay, this is a huge idea because all ideas should be critiqued and questioned, right? Nobody is above that. We've got—
Correct. There are some ideas, however, that I do not think merit debate, such as personal identity. The only person who can debate their identity is the person who holds the identity. At least that's my take.
And to a point in society where if it is a black person or a trans person or a black trans disabled queer non-binary has one foot, we can't critique these people anymore. Anybody who is considered a
You're able to critique them. Nobody says you can't critique them. Why are you like this?
oppressed, we have to believe their narrative. Another quote from this awesome article. Well-intentioned educators lack understanding in this ideology's origins. Anti-racism ideology is stemming from a kind of revised postmodernist philosophy, and from that, critical race theory. Postmodernists argue that there's no such thing as objective truth. Truth is merely a narrative held by the groups who hold the power in society. While postmodernism is a great literary lens in which to discuss different historical narratives, I am hoping that educators can see that this also brings with it dangerous consequences. And this is the most important sentence here. By objecting truth, we are now going to deny this.
By denying objective truth, not... By denying ontology is what it's basically saying. By denying ontology, we are now going to deny the scientific method.
Scientific method. My favorite part of this article is when he talks about how, everybody in his teaching staff is so proud of being anti-racist, yet they make these new rules for young black men and women who are constantly late to class because, the stereotype is that black people can't be on time. How did we get here?
I'm so not racist. I just made a racist joke. Ariel, everybody. Okay. So, we're gonna continue, but I don't think the way to critique something like this is to immediately go, no, the stereotypes are true. I don't think that that's a good way to handle this. But can I just say that the scientific method is not thrown out when we are talking about racism, when we are talking about gender issues? Generally speaking, the scientific method is what we use to come to our actual conclusions where a lot of the stuff is concerned. But does she include the articles here? Does she? Let's see here. No, she's got her OnlyFans. Not that I care. Okay, let's continue.
I would say the same for the hashtag It's Okay to Be Straight. I constantly see how many people are identifying as non-binary and queer and all these other genders when they are not same-sex attracted or experiencing gender dysphoria. Most of them are just dressing differently, want to express themselves differently, or in between the idea of masculine and feminine. In the grand scheme, is it...
Holy shit, you just described non-binary accurately while disagreeing with it, you absolute dumb shit.
Okay to be straight? Yeah, obviously. Is it okay to be white? Yeah, obviously, hello. These are all things that we cannot control and do not make us better or less of a person. But let's see what the far left has to say about this, shall we? The trouble with saying it's okay to be white, of course, there's a fucking article on this. Okay,
there's an article on everything. These people need to get paid. Duh. But, alright. So, I'm going to go ahead and make a prediction of what the article's going to say, because it's not linked in here, and I haven't read it, but I'm just going to go ahead and make a prediction that their method is going to be pointing out that when you say it's okay to be white, you are generally saying it in response to somebody saying it's okay to be some other minority. Which means that you're basically pulling a victim card, and that's a problem. When you didn't do anything to, and you don't exist in a space that earns that victimhood. That's my prediction. I wonder what her article is actually going to say.
Okay, so a bunch of posters apparently were printed out and put on university campuses. He said the posters were a protest of racial discriminatory ideology taught at the university. He said many professors explicitly teach in their courses that it is not okay to be white. It's okay to be white appears to be a literal or denotive message, but when we read it in context against the backdrop of institutional Eurocentrism and current anti-racist political movements like Black Lives Matter, we can see that it is far from benign.
This is probably why there's been an uprise in things like hashtag It's Okay to Be White. Or can we just simply admit that it's freedom of speech and also freedom of interpretation? If you choose to interpret a simple statement such as all lives matter as a jab at black people, that's on you. But I don't think...
No, this is the you choose to be offended argument. That's all this is the you choose to be offended argument. If somebody is saying all lives matter, in response to you saying Black Lives Matter, then the goal there should be stated in the time they choose to argue it. Nobody said all lives matter until somebody said Black Lives Matter. Historically. You can say, oh no, that's on you, but all this does is put somebody who is in a position of disenfranchisement or victimhood, and it forces them to stay in that position forever. Because it's always going to be their fault. If somebody makes a cotton-picking joke around them, it's always going to be their fault if they interpret that as racism. It's always going to be their fault. Pretending that all individuals are an island, and somehow, by merely interpreting the things around us differently, the world will fundamentally change for the better. If I see somebody who is a legitimate white supremacist running around with a MAGA hat and all lives matter, yeah, there's going to be an interpretation that I'm going to throw out there that maybe this person's a bit of a problem. But there's also a reality to that. Especially when a lot of that is done in the backdrop, with the backdrop of BLM behind it. If I respond white power to somebody saying black power, and they said black power in response to white oppression over them, what does that sound like to you? Based on the series of unfortunate events that have led to me saying white power. It's not me just trying to get mine and, oh no, I'm proud to be me. No, it's been done in response to somebody trying to point out that they, as a minority group, are disenfranchised and would like to be more enshrined in the American political spectrum.
I think it's healthy to automatically assume simple statements are malintentioned unless you want to constantly view yourself as a victim.
No, your argument constantly puts somebody in the position of being a perpetual victim. You don't have the ability to be anything but the victim when every single thing that you can do when somebody responds to you is automatically your fault. It's your fault for interpreting all lives matter as racist. It's your fault for interpreting this as that. If it's always going to be their fault for what somebody else says to them, that is what creates a victim. You absolute moron.
Should go without saying, but white nationalism or neo-Nazism isn't the same as saying it's okay to be white.
Nobody says that it's the same thing, and if they do, they are severely uneducated on the issue. However, the people who say it's okay to be white are very likely to be infiltrated by neo-Nazis, because they're going to see that and go, ah, we can use it. Consider Richard Spencer. Consider somebody who hears a slogan like free speech for all and will step in that line and march with them and do everything, but when asked in a back room, when asked legitimately if he believes in free speech, he goes, no. But we have to make a show of it so we can win and take free speech away from the people we don't like. That happens more times than you can count.
Furthermore, I can't change the fact that I was born with this skin color, so it doesn't make me special in that regard. That said, if you find your skin color special enough to celebrate it, that's fine, you do you. But remember to keep that same energy, meaning if you're proud of your blackness, other people should be allowed to celebrate their color as well.
Now, why do people generally get proud of their blackness? Usually, in America at least, it's because they were told to be ashamed of it. This is the same thing that happens with gay pride. Why did we have gay pride? Because people were told to be ashamed of it. If your response to oppression is to be more proud of yourself, and then somebody else's response is, well, I'm proud too. Congratulations, Victim Lucy! Would you like a cookie? Yay! You're proud of being white. Neat. But if you're white, just like me, I am white. There are certain things and certain advantages that I have in reality. Less advantages and more I don't have to deal with certain disadvantages. If I throw my name onto a job proposal, I am more likely to get it than somebody whose name sounds more black. If I get stopped at a traffic stop, I am less likely to get my car searched. If a police officer pulls a gun out on me, because I have a Nerf gun in the car, it is less likely that I, as a white person, am going to get shot. And if I go, I'm proud to be white because I had to earn less in my life by being white. It doesn't do anything. Narula86 says it right in the chat. Pride movements are generally defiance against suppression. But when you have a pride movement that grows in response to another pride movement, they believe that they are suppressed by the people in that pride movement who are actually being suppressed. But go ahead, pander to your audience.
Including white people.
If we compare it to people saying that I'm proud to be gay, I don't think that's actually comparable. Obviously, we are saying we are proud to be gay, but what we actually mean when we say that, we are proud to be ourselves and living our truth openly. We are not proud of the simple fact that we exist and did not choose this. People don't need to come out as black or white in the same way you need to come out as LGBT. Well, at least some people. Some people are obvious. Consumer culture helps.
I mean, at the end of the day, though, there's more to it than that, Ariel. There's also the fact that you were told not to be proud. Like, literally, the stream with Carlin, Blair, Lauren, and John Doyle, that stream was literally a bunch of conservatives arguing with each other, and one of them just going, no, being trans is a gateway to pedophilia, being gay is a gateway to pedophilia. Literally, in 2021, arguing against people who are in her political party. And those people are going to have to respond with, no, I am who I am. I'm proud to be who I am. Because they were told to be ashamed of it. But,
helps build rebels. Identity is a big part of branding campaigns, diffusing politics of new social movements into commercial demands for representation, inclusion, diversity, and tolerance. Obviously, like we know that already. Consumerism also preaches an ethnic of non-conformity.
An ethic, not an ethnic.
Nonconformists are never satisfied with the status quo, continually seeking new ways to subvert it. Here's the best part. Therefore, to be a rebel, to transgress and subvert the perceived status quo, is the dominant popular mode of identity. And if being anything other than being white and cis and straight, people are going to figure out how to do it. Because people are hating on cis, straight, white people these days. Now I think...
usually in response to them doing something. Now, I'm not saying that there are not a handful of people who have gone on a hate campaign against somebody merely for being cis, merely for being white. I've seen people say sissy in response to the T-slur. I've seen people say, that cis people are the problem, cishet people are the problem. I've seen people do all that. Yes, generally you do have extremists who do that because you have extremists in every single group. But, generally speaking, you don't see hate for white people, you see hate for what people do with their privilege as a white person, or for an action, something they've done. And then somebody tries to misinterpret that as hating them for being white. And then, meanwhile, a lot of times saying something extreme out of the other side of their mouth, like calling them the N-word, or, telling them that they should have gone back to picking cotton, or what have you. I live in Georgia. This is common here.
I think I understand how we got here. Let me know what you think, though. I think it's obvious that we need to learn to separate intellectual conversations and activism, so I will leave you with this. Challenging a narrative is not racist. It is not transphobic. It is not sexist. It is not bigoted. All ideas should be critiqued.
Yes, all ideas should be critiqued, but here's the thing. If an idea has basically been shown to be the case, unless you're willing to sit down and engage with the academic literature on it, it is better to just accept that that is how things are, unless you're willing to go in and look through the academia and point out problems in it. This is the issue that we get with flat earthers, where they go, all ideas are meant to be critiqued, so we critique the globe earth, we challenge the globe narrative of the world, when all of academia is basically in favor of, no, the earth is a globe. This is the same thing we get in several scientific fields. When the academia is on your side, look through it, try to figure out what's wrong with it, but if you keep on coming up that nothing's wrong with it, then there you are. If the only way you want to engage with this is, a handful of articles on the internet, then yeah, you're going to be able to find bias where you want it. You're going to be able to find an article that argues your position very easily, very quickly. It's not going to be difficult. That said, what do you guys think? I think this was a bit of a fustercluck. Honestly, the anti-racist is code for anti-white thing, that's been considered to be a dog whistle for a while. Anti-racist does not code for being anti-white. Anti-racist is trying to point out when other people are being racist so that people who are racial minorities can be more comfortable in an area. That doesn't mean you need to be their white knight, but it also means, hey, maybe step up. If somebody says a racist thing to your black friend, and your black friend isn't stepping up to the defense and they are visibly uncomfortable, maybe you should use your position and do something about it. Maybe. If they're stepping up to the plate, cool, then neat. You don't have to be their white knight. Nobody's saying be the white knight. What I am saying is don't let racism slide. Don't. It's not hard to do. But it can be difficult if it is somebody in your family. But with that said, let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. As always, everyone, please hit the subscribe button and the like button if you haven't already. It really helps my channel out. Check the description if you want to support my channel and what I do. And as always, everyone, insert into video tagline here.